Hey guys, Danny Gustin with Danny Gustin Fitness Podcast here. Our guest today is Patrick Branham. Patrick is one of my clients. Patrick is an executive. He's a father of 3. He's on a board of 2 different whatevers, right? And he's a busy guy. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is how to navigate fitness and prioritize fitness in a busy lifestyle, how to overcome some of the obstacles associated with that. We took some twists and turns talking about mental health, depression, anxiety, how medications can affect people, their metabolisms, etc. I'm sure we got into some other things along that way too. We went to some of Patrick's injuries that he's experienced over the years and how he's navigated that successfully, not perfectly, but successfully, and to where he's found a way to continue to move forward and honor his goals and honor what he's trying to do with fitness. And so I think you guys are going to get a lot out of this podcast, and I know I did. So thanks again, Patrick.
It was great. Thanks for having me.
Do you watch the UFC?
I do not.
So
we're off to a great start.
There's a announcer. His name's Bruce Buffer. Michael Buffer. His half-brother, Michael Buffer, is the guy, let's get ready to run.
Oh, okay.
Big boxing guy, right?
Sure.
I hear he makes an insane amount of money just to say those lines.
I'm sure he does.
But Bruce Buffer's line is, "We are live." So,
all right.
Nothing?
No, nothing.
No.
Never heard it before. Sorry.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah.
You know what? Actually, Patrick, it's been great having you on today.
I appreciate it, Danny. It's always a pleasure. I'll see you next week.
See you next week. So let's get right into it. One of the things that I've been really wanting to talk to you more about is, over the years we've been training, I've often shared with you other client stories, experiences, not in too much detail, right? But just every once in a while, just the general stuff. And one thing that's popped up is people coming up with reasons for why they're not doing things based on being busy. And I was caught off guard one time at the intensity of your response one time, where I said, oh yeah, he's busy, he's got this, and this going on, and I get it. And you said something like, no, that's bullshit, man. I figure it out. I've got these things going on, right? And so why did you feel so strongly about that then? And we've talked about it since, and you still feel convicted about that, I would say, right?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, like, as you know, I'm pretty motivated.
Yeah.
And I can, I'll hold people accountable on the how much are you coming in to work out front. And I'm sure we'll get into the fact that somebody could hold me a lot more accountable on the what are you eating front, and how, and they both play in. As we both know, they both play in. But like my reaction, I remember vividly when we were talking about that.
Yeah, that's why I said strongly.
It might have been a little worse language than the bullshit, but we'll keep it there.
Yeah.
But no, like the visceral reaction was really like, I'm an executive. I have 3 kids. I'm divorced. My kids are between the ages of 11 and 20. And I'm on 2 boards besides having a big job and taking care of 3 kids. And I just, you find time for whatever you think is important. And so, my reaction to, there's not many people that are busier than I am. And I find time, and as you know, I'm in here generally 5 or 6 days a week. So you don't necessarily see that on camera, but, yes, I do.
Yeah, you do. We talked about the other day. There's this guy I follow on YouTube, and first off, Patrick's in his 50s, and Patrick's getting pretty jacked right now. Pat, what you probably put on, what I would say, if I really had to guess, over the last 6 months, 10 pounds of muscle?
Yeah, I would say at least 10. I mean, I do the E-Volt on a pretty regular basis. And I'd say probably, 10 plus.
Yeah, got a nice compliment from your girlfriend the other day.
I did. We'll leave that one off here as well. But yes, she grabbed my arm and was surprised.
Yeah.
So which was a good feeling. Right?
It's an awesome feeling, right? And so one of the things Patrick and I have been talking about is when you are a natural lifter, let's say, right? You're not using any performance enhancing drugs like steroids and testosterone. Sometimes you have the choice between being lean, like, hey, you take your clothes off and you look lean, right? Kind of ripped, or looking big in clothes, right?
Yep.
And in fact, I had that idea refined by a YouTube guy I follow. I think his name's Sean. I don't know his last name. It's a long name, but he did this matrix thing. I explained this to you, but I'm explaining to everybody else. He did this matrix thing where he has the red and the blue pill, and it said, look lean naked, look big in clothes. That's the dilemma of the natural body, or, lifter, right? So anyways, we can always be doing a little bit more of everything, but I'd say all things considered, you've been killing it lately.
Yeah, and I definitely don't use any performance enhancing anything other than working out with you. But there you go. So, but what I will say to that is, historically, I'm self-conscious about kind of where I'm at right now, and you know that, but because historically I've been on the red pill of looking lean.
Yeah.
I've younger, whatever, always was pretty thin, not a lot of body fat, whatever. And just as you get older, it's harder and harder and to keep the stuff off. So, I've looked more on the blue pill side of bigger right now than I want to, but it's all a journey.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to ebb and flow, but one of the things that does happen in your 30s, and I'm even noticing this now, is, on one end, you can have a little bit of a slowdown with your metabolism relative to, I'm putting on extra weight. But there's almost this sweet spot in your 30s, and maybe I've heard even into your 40s, and maybe even into your 50s, I'm sure it's different for everybody, where you're also putting on more muscle too. Right? Like your ability to just gain muscle is more significant once you're into your 30s than it would have been in your 20s, right? And I've noticed that myself too. Like on one end, if I act up a little bit, it's a little bit slower for me to get my weight back down to where I want it to be. But on the same token, I'll hit the same intensity with my lifts that I would have in my 20s, and my numbers are just going up more than they would back then. So.
Yeah, I'm in the mid 50s and probably in the best shape that I've been in my life. Certainly, maybe a couple times in the last 10 years it's been close.
Yeah.
But I'd say I'm pretty close. And when I was in my 20s, I couldn't put weight on.
Yeah.
It didn't matter what I ate or what I did. I could not gain any. I didn't work out like I work out now, but I couldn't gain weight or mass. And now it's easy to gain mass.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think. Really nutrition's been a big part for me as well. Like you've encouraged me to up my protein intake.
Yeah.
And really in the last 6 months, it's part of what I've done. And the muscle piece comes with it. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I've used this analogy before, but there's a lot of people who work out and they work their butts off. A lot of people do. And the analogy I use is, it's like when you work out and you do a hard strength training workout, it's like sending out a job posting for people to build something. Let's say they're building a building, right? And so you send out that stimulus through working hard, and the body's like, okay, we need to build. So all the people show up to the job site, right? But if you're not eating a sufficient amount of protein, there's no brick, there's no cement, so you just kind of have a bunch of guys twiddling their thumbs, right?
Yep.
Now, obviously, there's probably some other benefits too, and there's a lot of debate on how much protein, right? It's not as if it was back in the day where, guys were going around saying 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, but I would say a lot of people are well under what they probably should be doing with protein. So when you were leaner in your 20s and just what a lot of people would refer to as a hard gainer, right? You just can kind of do what you want and you just don't really gain weight. It's just fast metabolism, whatever, right? When did you start to notice that shifted? And was it gradual? Has it changed between your 30s and 40s and 50s? Were there benchmarks for as your body started changing and responding to things differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. I probably started seeing some of it in my 30s. In my 30s is really when I probably started lifting weights on a somewhat regular basis.
And why was that?
I got tired of doing cardio. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
Just something to do.
Yeah, something to do. I don't even know how I picked it up, to be honest with you. But I started lifting weights then. I was in pretty decent shape, and I actually could put some weight on and put a little bit of muscle on it at that time as well, where I really started to see it become more difficult to take off. The fat part anyway was probably around, mid-40s.
Mid-40s, okay.
I would say. And I attribute it, you and I have talked about this before. I'll be open on this one. I was on antidepressants for a short period of time, about 6 months, and I gained about 10 or 15 pounds just from going on the antidepressants.
Yeah.
And, I swear, I blame it on this, and I know it's not the case, but I've never been able to take that 15 off. I've whittled away at it, but I feel like it's stuck there ever since. And I don't know if that's the medication or it may be the age or it may just be my nutrition intake or probably all of the above. But yeah, that for sure sticks in my head as a time where it started to become difficult to take it off.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me wonder, what did the medication, I mean, of course, like anything, I'm sure it's multifaceted,
Sure.
right? It's all those things are probably part of the story, right? But is it the fact that the medication changed some sort of chemistry within you? Is it the fact that the medication temporarily changed that chemistry and then you just happened to be in your mid-40s, so your body was less responsive to shifting? It's interesting to think about that because I know that is the story for a lot of people who have been on various medications,
Yeah.
right? Like you and I have spoken about that. When I was a little kid, I was on Ritalin and Adderall because I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 4, maybe 5. I was probably 5. Anyways, so I was one of the kids going to the nurse's office at lunch to get my Adderall or Ritalin or whatever it was at the time, basically, pharmaceutical meth or cocaine. And I'd throw my lunch out. I wasn't hungry.
Yeah.
It's a powerful stimulant, and I just wasn't hungry. So it was interesting for me because I weighed about 59 pounds until I was, I think, almost in 6th grade. I was still under 60 pounds. And so I was still fast, and I was feisty as all get up, right? So I would still keep up with everybody. But it was interesting. I had this summer where I broke my arm, right? Playing this game called Road Rash, which, long story short.
We may need to explore that, but okay.
Yeah, so long story short, because Road Rash was a game where we went down the hill, and I'm lucky enough that I grew up in a neighborhood full of boys. There was like 20 boys within 5 years of each other in 2 or 3 blocks of my house.
That's
so it was
awesome.
just pandemonium all the time, right? And so one of the games we played is there's a hill next to my house. I think we maybe played Road Rash twice, and this is probably why. But anyone would just pick whatever vehicle they had, right? So you have a skateboard, scooter, big wheel, whatever, right? No bikes. And we go down the hill, and no holds barred, right? However you can win, you win. So that means you're kicking your friend off their scooter or shoving someone's big wheel tire back, right? You just figure it out, right? And so one of the times we played, one of my friends invited a kid who wasn't from our neighborhood, and he brought his sister's bike, right? Why he brought his sister's bike, I'm not entirely sure. But he broke that rule, but whatever, we're all kids, it'll be fine. So as I'm going to kick someone off of their thing, I hit the curb, I fall over, arms here, he runs over my arm with his bicycle, and it broke my arm in 2 places, and I dislocated my elbow, which was a long trip to the hospital. But anyways, long story short, I was very sedentary after that. So I went from weighing 59 pounds to all of a sudden I'm not really doing anything, and I gained like maybe 20 pounds. And then I didn't go back to that again, like the skinny, almost too skinny version of myself, right? And in some ways that was good, it helped me with some sports, but in some ways it was difficult for my body to acclimate to a new normal. So I wasn't as fast or agile in soccer anymore, where I was once one of the fastest kids there, probably because I'm running around like a little stringy gazelle versus, this guy with 20 more pounds.
A moose.
So yeah, a moose. I was basically a rhinoceros. No, so I never got too big, but it was interesting how even just that small little season of new changes, we weren't going back to that anymore.
Yeah.
And I think around the time I hit puberty, even maybe a year or two before, I stopped. The Adderall, Ritalin, all that stuff didn't affect me the same way, so I still would eat. I could eat and stuff like that, but it is just crazy how just the prescription drugs, we oftentimes think about it coming from a doctor, and it's all good because it's from a doctor, and in many ways it is, right? Especially if you're communicating with them honestly and getting blood work when it's necessary, but in some cases it doesn't come without its side effects, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you and I have talked a bunch about the topic of medication. I'm ADHD as well, undiagnosed when I was a kid, right? No one cared. It was just, you were all hyper. We were all that way.
Yeah.
So I never had the ADHD meds, but my son who you know well at this point, is ADHD, definitely needs the medication. And we've talked about the impact for him. It's the same thing for a long time. He was 60 pounds. I was trying to remember as you were talking. He was 60 pounds, and I think he was in 8th grade.
That's crazy. Wow.
And then,
it's like a beanpole.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was tiny. And it's tall, but just nothing. You could see every bone. And that's kind of how I was as a kid as well. But then, he got on some different medication, which then also caused some weight gain for him. And he's trying to figure that out too. So I want to be careful to say, because I think you went to the same spot. I'm 100% support medication. I'm not like anti, but it definitely has an impact in lots of different ways. Right?
Yeah, well, it's like anything else where you just, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer sometimes. It's just the best answer for you. I would just encourage people to not necessarily, from my own experience, this is my bias, just see what else you can explore naturally.
100%.
So even for my son, for example, I've always felt it in my bones that I was going to have a kid who was just like me, right? And so my oldest son, Jamie, has it's getting much better, but it's not natural for him yet to make eye contact, right? He will make eye contact, but it's more like when he's ready to make eye contact, right? Because he's just moving constantly. He's just always wants to be doing something, whether it be physical or something that's mentally stimulating, like reading or pulling my cat's tails or whatever, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And so one of the things I've been trying to encourage him with is, he'll say thank you like this. I really try to encourage them to say thank you and look in the eyes. And so he'll go like, thank you. And I'll go, Jamie, look him in the eyes, and I go, thank you. And I sometimes I wonder if he's messing with me, but I know he does have challenges with that, or it's just maybe almost like, I wonder, what I'm getting at really is I wonder if it's a muscle, almost, the ability to focus. Because I think of ADHD, if I just focus on symptoms, it's an inability to focus where you need to focus, right? Because anyone who knows anyone with ADHD, you can focus. Put them in front of video games, they will focus,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
Put them in front of a TV or a movie they want to watch, they will focus. So it's almost like, can you allocate your focus where you need to at the right time, right? And I wonder how much of that is a muscle that needs to be trained, right? Like, so if you think, in some ways you could call that anti-mindfulness, right? Because as you're sitting here talking to me, I might be going, well, I got to go to the grocery store after this, and man, when are the Bears on? And then before I know it, you're like in the background, like Charlie Brown's teacher, right?
Yep.
And then I'm just like, I look back at you and I go, yeah, that's great, Patrick. On to the next thing, right? But I wasn't really listening to you. I wasn't present with you. And I wonder with ADHD specifically, how much of that is learning behaviors to teach someone how to be more mindful, training that muscle, if you will, of being able to focus your attention. And And so I'll let you know over the next couple of years, because I do see those tendencies in Jamie, and I wonder, if I just keep on with some of these disciplines of helping him just kind of focus when he needs to and make eye contact and encourage that. I'm hoping it gets better, and that's my hypothesis. At least we'll see what happens.
No, my experience on it is that's probably what you'll see. For me, having not gone on medication ever, but I'm still pretty functional.
Yeah. You would have had to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I've noticed over my career is a lot of pretty successful executives have ADHD.
Yeah.
And they've just figured out how to harness it. I kind of joke sometimes that it's my superpower, because I can be doing this, this, and this. I think about it, and like the ADHD thing, I think about it in terms of like multiple gears in my head that go at the same time.
Yeah.
And if I don't engage each of those gears in a certain way, they run rampant, right? They're spinning at whatever they want to spin at.
Yeah,
whether it's thinking about the Bears game this weekend, or that I need to go to the grocery store, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So for me personally, like one of those is almost always engaged with music, right? I don't necessarily I'm not a person that turns the TV on to have background noise.
Yeah.
But I am a person that I almost always have music on. And I may not notice it. Sometimes, with Apple Music, it'll replay the same song over and over.
Oh, okay.
I literally could listen to it 20 or 30 times and not realize that I'm actually listening to the same song.
Really?
But it engages that gear, so
Okay.
it keeps it from wandering. And that's what I've really done. But, ADHD is a interesting and kind of a wild thing. So
Yeah. Well, I think in some ways, I personally, because I experienced it, at least the symptoms of it, I'm always careful to clarify the symptoms of it, because I don't necessarily want to identify with a diagnosis. But I wonder how much of it is like, I want to change the stigma, let's put it that way. And so I have been communicating it to Crystal and my parents, when every once in a while that tendency to say, oh, maybe he's like you and has ADHD. I'm like, no, hold on. He's a macro focuser, right? And so I think of what you just said. You're talking about basically 5 or 6 little hamsters on a wheel who have different speeds that they go, and maybe different obstacle courses they're doing in your head, right?
Yeah.
Jobs that they need to be doing or want to be doing, right? People who have ADHD symptoms are oftentimes people who are going to be focusing on a lot of things at once, right? You may, I know something that's, a lot of people who have ADHD talk about music and sounds, right? And so I'll be on the floor here at the gym, and I can hear the lyrics to the song while I'm training my client, I was about to say counting reps, but we both know, that's a little shoddy.
That is a little
That
challenge.
might be where that takes the back seat, right? But watching the form, having a conversation, right? And I'll ask someone else about a lyric or a song, and I go, "Did you hear that?" And they'll go, "What song?" Right? Or even, this is sort of a famous conversation in my household, because my wife had a harder time getting used to me being that way at times, right? And to be fair to anyone, right, the classic ADHD symptoms where you think of, you're saying something to me and I go, that's right, let's just call a spade, that easily can be construed as rude,
Sure.
Right? And so it is something that you don't want to necessarily just use as hey, I have ADHD, right? Get over it, right? And so, but with her, she sometimes had a hard time getting used to the fact that I look like I'm spacing out, but I may not necessarily be spacing out, right? So, for example, we're in the doctor's office when she was pregnant with Jamie, and she thought I was spacing out, and she's like, Danny. I go, what's up? She's like, oh, well, you just looked like you were spacing out. I go, no. She goes, well, that's what it looked like. I go, I was just listening to the song behind the desk. She goes, what song? And I go, exactly, right? Right? We're both just tuning in onto different things, right? So that's kind of why I think of it as macro focusing. Like, we're tuning into different frequencies, right? And it may be easier for some people to just stay here, right?
Yep.
And there's obviously advantages to that, right? But for other people, like maybe you and I, life just is a little easier when we're, juggling a few things at once to just keep things engaging, or I don't know what it is exactly, but
it helps with the focus. And, we kind of bringing it back to your original question of like my busyness and how do I find time to do these things? Like similar to my mind of keeping things engaged, I need to keep myself occupied as well. And idle Patrick's not a fun Patrick to be around. Like I get super antsy and, I'm looking for the next thing to do. And so, it's not only your mind, but it's also there's the physical component that goes with that too, that you have to I have to engage in lots of stuff.
Yeah.
And typically lots of different things. So I don't have, other than probably exercise, I don't have anything that I do on a regular basis that, a hobby or whatever, right? Like, sure, I cut the grass, I do some landscaping, I do this, and I'd like to go here, I like to do that, but I don't play an instrument. I don't have any kind of hobby outside of working out that I would say like, this is my thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's 20 different things that occupy a little bit of my time whenever I have it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is something I struggle with, and I'm curious to get your feedback on it, right? I struggle sometimes to marry this idea that I have of I want to be a natural person, as in I want to experience life with minimal, as cleanly as possible, in the sense that I don't want to be necessarily listening to music if I don't need to be listening to music. I don't want to be overly caffeinated because I want to experience things as I am naturally, right? I could go on.
Sure.
Right? And so almost in my mind, that's an idea of being present, right? Like I'm present because I'm not listening to music when I don't need to be listening to music, right? Or whatever. But on the flip side, I have to, if I'm being honest, I like being on caffeine, right? And I like the feeling of caffeine, right? And I occasionally get home and just want to throw on music. And sometimes I overthink and I'm like, wait, why exactly do you need to listen to music right now? Are you trying to avoid quiet time? If so, what is the reason why you're avoiding quiet time? And my wife helps me with that too, because she's more laissez-faire about it. She goes, if you want to listen to music, just throw it on, right? And so I've almost come to this new, I guess, conclusion or normal as far as, hey, as long as you're being intentional about the decisions you're making, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like if you're being intentional about listening to music, then that's fine. If you're being intentional about drinking the cup of coffee and as opposed to just before you knew it, you had 5 cups of coffee that day because you weren't really thinking about it and you're just sort of on autopilot, right? Because I guess the fear initially stemmed from the fact that I was concerned that I was keeping myself from first off, maybe just giving myself quiet time to be open to whatever, right? God, the universe, my thoughts, right? But also, maybe I don't want to think about some of that stuff, right?
You're touching a nerve on that one for me, right? Like
it's probably a nerve for a lot of people, right?
It is. It is, and I'm self-aware of it, and also self-confident enough to be like, I'm self-aware that I'm avoiding.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm okay. I'm doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you started to describe like the quiet time and letting your own thoughts absorb and whatnot, which is something that like almost sent me into a panic attack. Terror.
Yeah.
In some respects, I'm not kidding.
No, I know.
And I say this to my girlfriend Robin. I'll talk about that. She's like, you always have something, music or something going or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I can't be alone with my own thoughts. She's like, well, what happened? So I'm not sure. And I'll share this. So my mother passed away like 2 years ago. And it came on pretty suddenly, and I had seen her about a week before she passed away, but I didn't get to see her right before. And her choice was to not have any kind of life celebration or anything, so there was no closure at all. So she she passed away. I didn't really have that full reaction to it or whatnot. And Robin was coming over. It was like a Friday night. Robin was coming over after work. We were going to hang out. She walks in the door. She looks at my face, and she's like, "What is wrong with you?" And I literally just burst into tears and like almost dropped into her arms sobbing. And I'm tearing up even talking about it.
Yeah, of course.
And she was like, what is going on? I'm like, this is what happens when you make me be alone with my own thoughts.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, that's not actually such a bad thing. And I'm like, but I don't want to feel this way. So yeah, I mean, it is definitely an avoidance thing.
Well,
right?
I would imagine, I actually don't have to imagine, but the concern, I guess, for me was always, not always, because half the time I like experimenting with stuff, and I'm like, let's just see what happens if I start doing this, right? You know? And I kind of figure out as I go why I'm doing something, right? But it sounds interesting. But the concern, and retroactively or in hindsight, is if you don't address those things, it may blow out sideways into other interactions, right?
Sure.
And so I guess that's the challenge for everyone. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to handle it, but I do think a lot of people struggle with that, right? I was even laughing the other day with one of my other clients where she's very much like you in the sense that she's a very high performer. I mean, half the time she's telling me how she's been working since 5 a.m, and I'm just like, oh,
yep.
I'm just getting stressed out talking to you about this stuff. And so anyways, she was talking about all these classes she signed up for and all this stuff, right? And so I just said, hey, I want to dare you to do something. She's like, okay, what? I go, I just want you to be alone and do nothing for 1 minute. She goes, what? She goes, you mean meditate? I go, no, I just mean do nothing. She goes, can I stretch? I go, no. She goes, can I foam roll? I go, nothing.
Can the camera see my legs start to shake? I need to get uncomfortable and scratching my arms. And, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm like, just do nothing. And anyways, it's interesting just how much aversion she had to that. And she did end up doing it. But I think that's probably, like, a couple of years ago, I referred to type A people, which I would in some ways consider you that, although careful to put anyone in too much of a box, right? There's always nuance to it. But high performers, right, are oftentimes people who have learned how to channel anxiety.
Yes.
Very, very well.
Yep.
Right? Like a flamethrower, right? And so, where some people experience anxiety and shut down and it turns into depression or whatever, some people are like, I'm gonna just keep going, right? Like, let's use this, whatever background fear is in my mind, that's fuel being put into my tank right
100%. I referenced the ADHD superpower with a lot of executives.
Yeah.
The other thing that goes right with it is anxiety and insecurity, right? And so it's the fear of failure and the anxiety that comes with that. And then you combine it with this ADHD thing, which gives you like a little more energy. And so any one of those things can be a debilitating thing for people.
Yeah.
Right? But to your point, if you kind of channel them all together in the right way, all of a sudden it becomes this like massive superpower. And I literally have seen that I can think of 10, 15 executives that I've worked with over my career that are like 100% anxiety, insecurity, and ADHD, and they're super successful because of it.
Can I ask you a heavier question relative to that? So when I hear about all these people who are successful, right?
Yes.
Right, and I get it, right? Like, who wouldn't? If I compared my portfolio to theirs, I'd probably be that is a way I measure success to an extent, right? But one way that I measure success is being at peace. And I wonder, would you say you're at peace?
Probably not. I would say I'm more at peace than I've ever been. And there's a lot of factors to that. But even, I started to cringe a little bit because I knew where you were going to go with this. But, certainly when I was younger.
You mean you're thinking ahead of what you think I might say?
Yeah, I don't know how that works. But so when I was younger, certainly let work, that aspect of my life take too much of my space, the professional success. And honestly, it wasn't about being successful. It wasn't like an ego thing for me, like, oh, I want to be this, I want to have that. Honestly, a lot of it was fear of failure, right? Like I got my first, I'm a chief financial officer, and my first CFO gig, I was 34 years old.
Dang.
And I was thrown into a situation that we had just done an acquisition. We spun off from another company, so I basically had to set up an entire company with a company that was already operating.
Yeah.
So they were, already moving ahead and growing, and I'm trying to catch up and put basic stuff in. So started out like completely overwhelmed and out of my element. And for the next 10 plus years of my career, it was just a total fear of screwing something up. And what started as 150 employees became 1,200 employees, and if I did something wrong, I could impact all those people's lives negatively, right? So it was total driving for that. And 12 years ago, we had a third child, and that completely changed my life, changed my perspective on a lot of stuff. I was 43 years old. I worked out then, but not to the same extent I do now. But as I started thinking, when you have a baby at 43, you're like, okay, I can do the math here. I'm going to be in my early 60s when he graduates high school, and I'm going to be retired by the time he graduates college. And I want to be able to keep up with the kid. I want to see him through all that. I want to see him get married and have kids if that's his path. And I need to take care of myself if I'm going to do that. And I have a 7-year age gap between my two older kids and my youngest. And I also, they were born in a time when I was working too much. So all of a sudden, I had kind of a second chance. And I would say, people that knew me then and people that know me now will tell you there's a complete difference in how I operate, both personally and professionally.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
It's a journey, man, right?
It is for sure.
And we've blown through about 40 minutes here, right? So, so as you can see, it's easy to kind of, we could talk about these types
Sure.
of topics all day, right? And so I definitely appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing some of that
Yeah.
stuff on camera here. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so we promise we won't make fun of you that much.
Okay, that's awesome. And I'm good if you do that.
No, of course not. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about today was, as a person who's motivated by goals, right, working towards things, we've talked about that, right? There, in some exercise circles, people would say, oh, well, you need to learn how to approach things sustainably, right? And that is true to an extent, but what does that even mean, right? For some people, our MO just might be having things to aim at,
Yeah.
right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So being someone who's it helps you, the times you're working out the hardest and the most motivated is when we have a goal, right? A
Yep.
specific time-oriented or at least like more detailed goal, right? And so that all being said, you have had some injuries that you've experienced before I met you, while I've been working with you, right? And so probably the first thing I wanted to ask you would be, what were some of the lower points of that journey, being injured, and how that affected you and just how you approached fitness, maybe your mindset? And how did you overcome that and manage to stay positive eventually and move forward?
Yeah, it was tough. I still don't really know what I did the first time, but I did something to sprain my SI joint. is what I finally found out after.
SI joint, for those who don't know, it's basically just...
I can't wait to see you demonstrate this.
Just right here, right? So you've got your lower spine, your lumbar spine, and this is your sacrum right here. Either side of your hip is referred to your ilium. So the SI joint is where the sacrum meets the ilium on either side. So you have two SI joints.
Well, I think I've managed to do them both.
Yes.
But I don't know for sure. The first time I remember it was really probably 2013 or 14, and it was after my youngest was born. And I had a goal at that time. I was going on a vacation for the first time in 12 years or whatever it was, and I'm like, I'm going to work out and get in good shape. And I was doing deadlifts and bam. And that has been, that was 10 plus years ago, and it continued to be a nagging issue over time, right? Like, so I think when we first started working out, probably every 4 to 6 months I would do something and to aggravate it. And there were times where, I couldn't walk up the stairs.
Yeah,
I could
debilitating.
barely walk. And it would go away. I would have to just take it easy for a little while, and it'd go away. And then the second I'd try to do deadlifts again, I'd do something to re-aggravate it. I'm sure it was form. It was this kind of recurring cycle of I could work out. I want to do lower body. I've never been blessed with a muscular hind quarters, So, and the only way you get that is lower body workouts. And, every 4 months I'd have to take a month off because I couldn't do any lower body. When we first started working out, probably 3 years ago now, I tried physical therapy. That helped a little bit. You and I worked on form. That helped a little bit. You've done a tremendous job of isolating in on, this muscle seems to be a little imbalanced relative to this one, and let's work to strengthen that. And then finally kind of hit one physical therapist that really diagnosed it and was able to kind of help me get reacclimated and not, every time I'd still aggravate it every once in a while, but he would be able to kind of put it right back in, and we'd take maybe a week off and get going again. But thankfully, all of this combined, I'd say once a year now, it'll flare up. And when it does, it's usually a day or two versus a month or two. So,
Wow.
It's a significant difference.
Yeah.
So I thank you for a huge part of that. Obviously, I put the work in, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's like, as the theme of the several conversations is multifaceted, right? So
Yeah.
there's been a lot of different, you have worked with some great, and I believe Dennis was the one.
Dennis
right,
was the one,
who
for
helped
sure.
kind of identify that it was an SI joint.
Yep.
Sprain or
Sprain is what he called it, and he's like, it was classic.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. I'd walk in, he'd go, take your shoes off. I'd walk 12 feet, and he'd go, get up there, because I know exactly what I need to do. And 40 minutes later, I would struggle to get onto the table and then almost spring off the table and skip out of his office.
Yeah.
So it's amazing.
Well, isn't it amazing when you are the textbook, right? Because not often is someone a textbook.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of nuance a lot of the times, especially when we're talking about joint injuries, right? Especially when we're talking about the spine. But the fact that you just kind of neatly fell into this one category, right? And it happened to actually do the trick for you. At least it seems like the biggest things. First off, shout out to Dennis of Paramount Physical Therapy in Naperville.
100%.
Right? And it seems to be that although, again, it's a multifaceted solution, what Dennis helped you with is that he's helped you have a maintenance plan, right? Like I often will see you before we even start our day. You'll be doing some of those exercises he gave you just because you even have like a hint of things being sort of off, right?
Yes, 100%. And, we'll go back. This seems to be a recurring theme, but driven by fear.
Yeah.
right? I don't want to, now that I've isolated in on the kinds of things that can help me, it's not perfect, but help me avoid an injury. Like those are the things that I just make sure that I do. And, we've also come to the understanding that the second something feels uncomfortable, normally I would just push through those things, right? And I do, except when it comes to lower back. When it's lower back, if it's uncomfortable, we just stop.
Yeah.
It's other stuff, you push through, you roll it out a little bit, you make fun of me, call me a couple names, and away we go.
Of course. The deadlift gets a bad rep, right? And you still occasionally will deadlift on your own. We haven't been doing as much together,
Yep.
but it gets a bad rep, and I think the important thing to remember for a lot of people, and again, I apologize to my training clients who I have on because I'm probably going to be using analogies you've heard, and God knows Nico has heard them a lot, but I use this analogy of exercise being like fire, right? And fire is not good or bad. Fire is just is, and it just depends on how you use it, right? It can be good depending on how you use it and for what job, and it can be bad, right? And so exercises like a deadlift, I would just refer to as being more flammable.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't mean it's bad, right? Because there's flammable things that are really awesome and amazing, right? And do great. That's how we warm our houses, with flammable things, right? But it just means it requires a greater degree of care as you go through it, right? And I think deadlifts for you and for many people are just one of those things where if you have pre-existing back issues and you're not properly bracing your core and you don't have good mechanics and you have weak glutes or whatever it may be, and you're not generating enough force through your posterior chain, legs, etc., it can go amiss pretty easily.
Yeah, it definitely does. The other thing that kind of came with learning those exercises is also realizing as I've gotten older, when I was young, you walk onto the baseball field and you start playing baseball, right? There was no warm up.
No warm up.
Not when I was a kid, right? Like you just did.
I mean,
we went outside to play.
We might have done like some jumping jacks or maybe done some shoulder
throwing
circles.
the ball back and forth or whatever. Sure, warm your arm up, but you're not warm. I didn't, at least as a kid, do that, and that carried straight into my workouts, right? When I first started working out with you, I would come in and throw 180 pounds or whatever we were going to bench or whatever I was going to plan on benching. I just throw the plates on and away I'd go. And you're like, what do you do? You might want to warm up a little bit.
Yeah.
And that has been a massive difference in my workouts as well, where I'm far less injury prone by appropriately warming up. And generally I would, if I'm again being honest, probably when I've had issues where I've had some twinges, it's where I've come in a rush and maybe not warmed up as long as or as good as I should have.
Yeah. It's been an interesting experience for me as a trainer because I less now today because I just am more confident than ever in my philosophies. But earlier on especially, there's sort of this balance between what you feel is going to be best for your client and also keeping your client happy to an extent, right? And there's still elements of that, of course, but I have to admit I caved more on warm-ups for certain people earlier on because they'd come in and they go, hey, I'm ready to go. And I go, oh, did you warm up? And they go, no, but let's just get to it. I mean, I'm like, oh, yeah, they're right. We are 5 minutes in already. And it's like nowadays I'm more like, we're not here necessarily to work out. We're here to go from point A to point B safely, effectively.
Yes.
Right? And so you not warming up is your problem, right? So that's what we're doing right now. You have to warm up, right? Because you're going to be more susceptible to injury. But even that, there's so much people will go, oh, well, I don't need to warm up because I walked 2 hours ago. I go, well, that was 2 hours ago, right? You're not currently warm, right? And so even now it's a little bit of a struggle, but it's just warming up properly. The evidence of it is just irrefutable as far as just a piece of beef jerky is going to tear a lot easier than a nice steak, right?
Right.
So just getting everything supple, warmed up, right, it's just key.
Yeah. And I was one of those clients that would get annoyed. I never shared this with you, but I would get annoyed.
I could tell sometimes.
like that we're gonna warm up.
Like I said, hey, we're gonna warm up, and then you're like, you look at the clock and then look back at me.
I'm a finance guy by trade,
Yeah.
so I'm more fiscally aware. Some people might call it frugal. I don't like that, but anyway,
Yeah.
I'm very aware. Like I have an hour with you, and time is a thing for me, right?
Yeah, sure.
I don't have. That's how we started this. I don't have a ton of time, and so if I'm going to be here and I want to work for an hour, I want to work for an hour.
Yeah.
So how did I solve that? I come in 15 minutes early. I get changed and ready to go. I get on the treadmill. I warm up, and I generally go do the warm-up stretch stuff that you're talking about to avoid injury. And I'm ready to go the second you're ready to go, which is right on the dot. You're done with your last client, and we get going.
And that's a perfect balance, because it's not as if I need to be warming up with you guys, right? I just want to make sure you're going to be prepared for what we're going to do to be safe, right? So that's perfect. So to anyone who's my client listening, you can always do that if you don't want to warm up with me, right? Or Nico's client or anybody's client, right? And so I wanted to go back real quick, because we're talking, it just jogged something for me, because you said, I got here 15 minutes early, and it kind of gets me back to, the guy who's super busy but also feels strongly about making time for what's important also manages to somehow get 15 minutes early to the session, right? And so going back to what we were talking about early with you feeling strongly about making time for what's important to you, what sort of practical advice would you give to someone who maybe is teetering back and forth between, I'm training, I'm working out, whatever it is, and yeah, it's important, but gosh, everything else, I'm so busy. Like, what would be some practical advice?
I want to preface it by saying, just like we talked about, tracking or different things work for some people and don't work for others, right? This is just what works for me. So I prioritize it. I want to work out. Historically, and this has changed, but historically, if I didn't work out first thing in the morning, I probably wasn't going to work out for the day. It's when I had my most energy, and that's also when I could carve the time out to do it. And if I wasn't able to do it then, the rest of my life got in the way, right? Whether it was work or kids or school or sports after or whatever, it just wasn't going to happen. And so early on, I just prioritized, I have to work out in the morning. And it became it's almost become this, it's not an obsession because it's not that bad. Anything taken to an extreme is not good. But like, if I don't work out, like, I don't feel like my day was complete. And so I built that routine in. And when my kids were younger and I had to worry about getting them on a bus or getting them whatever, I'd get up at 4 o'clock and go work out at 4:30. So like, that's the thing that worked best for me. I heard, I met a guy in here working out a couple of weeks ago. You introduced me to him, this guy that lives in my neighborhood, and I overheard him say, this is like 5 weeks in a row of working out at lunch, and the 2 guys were in here together, and they built that routine where they made it a priority, and it sounds like the 2 of them were holding each other accountable, and they were coming in together every day at their lunch. And that, for me, that routine, if it's a routine, it's there, and it's hard for me to break.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work for everybody.
I think that's awesome, though, and I think you mentioned lunch and you mentioned you doing first thing in the morning. I think the common denominator there is having a plan.
Yeah.
Right? You're not just waking up going, I wonder when I'll work out today.
Right.
Right? You have probably thought in advance, these days, these times, right?
Yes.
And I think when you're being proactive versus reactive, it makes it so much more easy to implement it, right? And I have to say that's what's worked for me recently too with the morning times, right? I wake up at 5:15 Monday, Tuesday, and Friday to work out in the mornings, because with 2 kids who are basically under 2, right? One, I could occasionally work out on a client cancellation, but I don't particularly like getting sweaty at work and then being sweaty for the rest of the day, although I'm not opposed to it from time to time. And also, after work, I'm starting to get anxious about just wanting to be with my family.
Yep.
And so, I'm just going to kind of put together a half-assed workout, and I might feel kind of good about it, but it doesn't really scratch that itch, right? Kind of like you were saying, if you aren't able to go after it the way you want to, it's almost like a certain level of anxiety goes into it. Like, oh, man, that's my thing. That's part of my routine, and I didn't really get to do that, right?
Yep.
And you have to be adaptable, but if you can set yourself up for success, you definitely should. And I have to say, the 5:15, it's been awesome. It took a little bit at first to wake up that early because it's like, this is kind of early. The sun's not up. But once you get going, as a family man, it's my time. No one's bothering me yet. I'm not listening to any baby monitors or anything like that. It's me and my time. And so I guess.
Yeah, and people can feel guilt about that, right? Like, you have 2 little kids at home, and should you be there? Should you be doing that? And like, what you're doing is you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So as we talked earlier, that was one of the things that drove me to really start working out on a regular basis. Is I wanted to be active enough when my kid, who's now almost 12, I go out and play baseball with him almost all the time.
That's awesome.
I mean, when I have him every other week, and we'll play catch 2 or 3 times in an afternoon or evening.
That's so cool.
And that's to kind of continue to answer some of your question about how do you fit it in. So one is routine. The second piece is I look for ways to be active to kind of tie stuff in. So
I like
as
that.
an example, my girlfriend Robin and I don't, she has 3, she's a single mom with 2 kids. I'm a single dad with 3 kids and, not a lot of time. And she's an executive as well. So we both are juggling the same challenges. When we hang out, if it's nice out, almost regardless of what we're going to do, it starts with a 3 to 5 mile walk. So we'll go on a nice walk. It's a good chance for us to catch up. We get some exercise. She is actually even more active than I am. It's hard for me to keep up with her because she walks about 5 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So it's a nice workout, or you go play out with the kids, or we'll schedule time to go do other stuff. Usually Thursdays we'll go do yoga.
Yeah.
So it's also fitting in. I can't remember. There was probably 10 or 15 years ago, we had a consultant come in and talk to us about like work-life balance.
Yeah.
Right. And he's like, well, work-life balance is bullshit. It's not work-life balance. It's work-life integration. Right. Like today's world, it's not. I clock in at 9, I leave at 5, and we're done. Right.
Yeah.
I may be, and I tell my team this all the time. I may send you an email at 4:30 this morning. But at 12 o'clock on Wednesday, you're not going to find me because I'm going to be at the gym working out with my trainer.
Yeah.
Right? At 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, you weren't going to find me because I was picking my kid up from school. At 8 o'clock last night, you might have got an email from me. So everything kind of ebbs and flows, and you kind of figure that out. And I am fortunate I work from home, which gives me a little more flexibility than other people. But anyway, this consultant talked about work-life integration and finding ways. So just like I said, we're having a date, but we're on a walk. I'm hanging out with my kid,
Yeah, you're double
but
dipping.
we're playing. Yeah, exactly. Finding ways to do 2 things at once.
Because you'd be doing it anyways,
You'd
right?
be doing something.
Well, you would hope that you're connecting with your significant other, right? And you've decided that exercise is important to you, or being active.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the stress that some people feel, right, bringing it all back full circle to the anxiety talk, is, it's one more thing to do, right? And it can feel overwhelming, right? But it's like, in some cases, it just doesn't have to be one more thing to do. It can be something that you integrate into something else, you double dip, you combine those things,
Yep.
right? And that can make all the difference.
Yeah, for sure. And as you're thinking about how you spend your time and finding that time to work out, right? Like, how much time do you spend scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, right?
Yeah.
How much time do you waste doing things versus carving out an hour or even 30 minutes? You talked about having kind of a half-ass workout. A half-ass workout's better than a no-ass workout.
100%.
Right? And so, some days are better than others, but I challenge anybody to look at how they're really spending their time. And I do this with people at work sometimes. If somebody's struggling and they're like, I just don't have time, I don't know where my day goes, I'll encourage them to track their time, not for me, but for them. Track it in 15-minute increments and be diligent about like, oh, Nico walked in and talked to me about, whatever. You don't have to say what you're talking about, but Nico came and chatted for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Or, the phone rang and I talked to my mom for 30 minutes or, work called or whatever it is, right? But you keep track and all of a sudden you start seeing a pattern of where your time is.
Yeah.
And, you can start now. Is it important to chat with Nico? Yes. You talk to your mom?
Very
yes.
important.
All those things are important, but you start thinking about it and you think about it at different times and you'll find time in there that isn't as important to you as other things. And the reality is, for some people, working out isn't as important.
And I think we'll end on this. Speaking of keeping track of time.
Oh, are we right there?
It's
Okay, good.
2:28.
Oh, nice.
And I got my next client in 2 minutes.
Oh.
So what were we just talking about? Darn it, I lost my train of thought.
Well, now you've lost
Keeping
my
track
train.
of
Keeping
time.
track of time and finding the time within your schedule to be able to work out. And working out isn't as important to some people as it is to others. Is that where I was going?
I guess one of the things as a trainer that I think sometimes people think I'm going to take it personally, that if they just say they don't like working out isn't important to them, right? Or maybe they just don't want to work out with me. That's fine too, right? But we've talked about this too, is that as a coach, as a trainer, I just want to help people, right? And I'm not here to judge anybody, right? And so priorities are going to ebb and flow too, right? And so there may be times in your life where you decide that exercise does have to take the back seat. But I would just encourage people to own that decision, right? Don't sit in limbo where you're pretending that exercise is important to you, but over and over you're not showing up, which is only just going to put you in this like shaming cycle of like, oh, I keep saying I'm going to work out 2 times a week, but I never do, and I feel guilty. And it's like, don't feel guilty. Just come revisit this when it is important enough for you to start doing something about it, right? And in the meantime, live your life, do what you need to do.
Absolutely. And you've done a fabulous job of demonstrating and living what you just said in terms of like, there's been times where working out has taken a back seat for me. Certainly there have been times when the nutrition has, and I think you've demonstrated to me what a good trainer looks like, which is meet you where you're at. You're like, dude, it's okay. If you're not tracking, just don't track. Do you want me to do that or not want me to do that, right? So I think one thing that people a misconception people may have is like, you're going to be screaming at them or you're going to be yelling at them for what they ate or whatever. But it's like, you set the goal. The person sets the goal.
Yeah.
The trainer helps them stay accountable to whatever that goal is.
Yeah.
You're not setting the goal for me. I'm setting my own. You're just helping me.
Yeah.
So you do a great job at it.
Well, I appreciate that, Patrick. You're awesome. I appreciate you as a person, as a friend, as a client. So thank you so much for being on.
I feel the same way. Thank you.
All right.
All right.